this point it is no secret that Riot achieved the impossible. When they released Aurelian Sol back in 2016, no one believed that he would be the herald of a new fleshed out universe. But here we are 3 years later with a universe that has its own massive mythos. Not only do we now know about the main plot point of League of Legends, but we also know that the different regions of Runeterra have their own smaller subplots. But what you may not realize is that all of them actually play a role in the main story. The Dark in War, LeBlanc in Noxus, Orlon founding Demacia. All of those storylines link to the Watchers and the destruction of Runeterra. We'll make a video on that later, because the story of League of Legends is already more complex than you probably imagine. Of course, Freljord always served as the main gateway for the Watchers. In the video where we talked about Lissandra, we learned that she almost let the Watchers destroy all reality. But that's not the only storyline Freljord holds. Freljord is also home to the demigods, who can be seen as the shapers of the environment. They are also known as the Old Gods of the North. It is believed that Anivia carries ice and snow on her wings, but she can also soothe blizzards. So many tribes, such as the one in Nunu's story, follow her wake. Ornn is a demigod that built the bridge that would help seal the Watchers. But Volibear is the one we didn't know much about. We knew that he had a cult of followers, the Ursine shapeshifters. He also fought Ornn in the past, resulting in rivers of blood covering the fresh lands of Freljord. But besides this, Volibear was always kept shrouded in mystery. Thankfully, that changed a couple of weeks ago, when Riot decided to polish the stories of Udyr and Sejuani. Because of these two champions, the story of Freljord takes another turn. And that's what we'll have a look at right now. Just a warning for those of you who would like to read it yourselves, in this video we will sum up the bios of Sejuani and Udyr, and we'll make a TLDR version of the story, Silence for the Damned. Sejuani was the child of a Freljordian political marriage. In Freljord, leaders of tribes usually bonded with other tribes to make their people stronger. And that's exactly what happened to Sejuani. Her mother Kalkia was the war mother of the Wintersclaw tribe. She wanted to gain new allies for her tribe, so she got married to a man she didn't necessarily love, but she knew his men were powerful. Sejuani is the child of that specific marriage. However, when Sejuani was still a child, Kalkia abandoned her tribe and her new family to find the man she fell in love with years ago. This meant that Sejuani's grandmother, Hejien, had to lead their people instead. Though Sejuani tried her best to be a good granddaughter, she never met Hejien's expectations. And as the tribe fell into chaos without a young leader, Hejien had even less time to take care of Sejuani. Because Sejuani was now left without a feeling of wealth, love or safety, she naturally looked for it elsewhere. Thankfully, Wintersclaw's sister tribe, the Avarosans, were like her second family. The Avarosan war mother, Grenna, who was also Ashe's mother, took Sejuani into her household. After Sejuani discovered that Grenna once beat Kalkia in a duel, Sejuani instantly saw Grenna as her new idol. Because of this new bond with the Avarosans, Sejuani and Ashe became good friends. Time passed and Grenna began to question how the Wintersclaw treated young Sejuani. This angered Hejien, who was still leading the Wintersclaw, and she cut all ties with the Avarosans. Over time, Wintersclaw became hostile towards the surrounding tribes. They were trying to reclaim some of their lost lands, but that attempt led them further into ruin. Somehow, the news about this spread so far, Kalkia learned about it too. And after Kalkia learned that her former tribe was slowly dying, she returned and took over Wintersclaw again. She even successfully calmed down the surrounding tribes. But the damage was already done and the Wintersclaw was weakened. Because of this, they had to rely on the Frostguard and their Frost Priest to protect them. Sejuani couldn't believe her family would side with the cruel Frostguard, and she was resolved to take over the leadership for herself. But it wasn't all so simple. First, she had to gain the support of their people. She achieved this by raiding a Noxian warship that was occupying the northern coast. During this assault, Sejuani freed a Druvask boar from the Noxian butchery. This boar would later become the biggest Druvask she had ever seen, and she would name it Bristle. After this successful mission, Sejuani was ready to return home and challenge her mother directly. In Freljord, a duel between a mother and her daughter was unthinkable, but Sejuani wouldn't back away. This outraged the Frost Priest, who had to step in, and in the end, Kalkia died before Sejuani could even reach her. As the new war mother of the Wintersclaw, Sejuani began absorbing nearby tribes, gaining more power and a horde of followers in the process. Since she was heavily against the Frostguard, and the Frostguard were known for slaying wielders of foul magic, she also attracted outcast shamans, spirit walkers, iceborn, stormborn, and worshippers of the old gods from all across Freljord. A couple of years later, Sejuani turned the Winter's Claw into one of the strongest tribes in Freljord, and now that she has everything under control, she is marching south, devouring the southern tribes, Noxian invaders, and even villages across the Demacian borders. Unfortunately, Ashe had a similar idea, and she also united people in a massive tribe, but with a different ideology. Because of their differences and because Sejuani sees Ashe as Grenna's betrayer, to the Winter's Claw the Avarosans are also seen as enemies. This was Sejuani's story somewhat summed up. So far there wasn't much on the old gods, but don't worry, it will slowly ramp up now. So let's have a look at Udyr, who reveals a little bit more about spirits. Freljord is full of warriors and shamans, but sometimes you can also find warrior shamans, who are known as spirit walkers. These individuals have a deep connection with the spirit of nature. Udyr was born under Blood Red Moon, and from a very early age, he showed signs of a spiritual connection. He could understand wolves' howls before he could speak, and he felt the raw emotions of nearby creatures. Destined to become a spirit walker, he was taken in by the Winter's Claw. Although his mentors expected Udyr to master his powers with ease, the boy couldn't handle his gift. The chaotic thoughts of so many other living beings flooded his mind, bringing him to the point of insanity. Months passed and the Frostguard raided his tribe, on the orders of a mysterious ice witch, who was obviously Lysandra. The Frostguard was to eliminate anyone displaying hints of spiritual magic. Udyr survived that night only because of his mentors who sacrificed themselves. So now, on top of the chaos that was already in his head, Udyr could also hear the pain screams of his tribespeople. This was the last straw that made him lose control. He unleashed his fury in a spiritual explosion, shaking nearby mountaintops and summoning an avalanche that forced the Frostguard to flee. Few survived this incident, and out of fear of his destructive power, the Winter's Claw was forced to abandon Udyr. Only one person in the entire tribe was willing to help him. It was an Iceborn woman that saw who Udyr really was. A man with strengths and flaws like any other. The two became close, and they cherished what little time they had together. Outside of their relationship, however, Udyr was used to being alone. Everyone feared him, and he kept it that way. So when one day a monk from a distant land approached his territory, Udyr lunged at him again and again, but the monk dodged all his attacks with ease. When it was obvious that this battle had no end, the monk introduced himself as Lee Sin. And Udyr found out that Lee Sin was dealing with the exact same struggles. They both held dangerous powers that were hard to master. The two quickly became friends, and Lee Sin took Udyr to Ionia, where people knew how to keep spirits at peace. Soon after that, Noxus invaded Ionia, and Udyr helped the monks of Hirana defend their temple. In the end, they were victorious and the Noxians fled. Udyr decided to stay in Ionia for a while, strengthening his understanding of spirits. He even trained under the elders of Hirana's temple, but eventually the spirits of Freljord called him home. Udyr could feel something was off, and Freljord was in danger. So he bid farewell to Ionia and Lee Sin, and he set out to rejoin Winter's Claw, knowing not how he would be received. As you can see, Udyr's bio was left open, because we already know what happens next. So now, with the fundamentals down, let's have a look at the real meat of this video. Again, this is going to be a TLDR version of it, but let's have a look at the story, Silence for the Damned. The story begins with Udyr being back in Freljord. He was now traveling with Sejuani's band. In fact, Udyr was her personal shaman. The setting sun signaled a freezing night was coming, so they decided to start a camp. Udyr noticed Sejuani in the middle of her group, helping her bloodsworn warriors build a hut. Udyr smiled in pride. This was the leader they needed, one that worked and led from the front. Udyr remembered Sejuani as a small bone-thin girl, so seeing her now as a mighty warrior was a pleasant surprise. Sejuani's warriors saw Udyr as a strange guy. Sometimes he talked to their horses, and sometimes their horses talked through him. Oftentimes, Udyr stabbed a metal dagger into his hand. The pain was enough to clear his mind from animal thoughts, and give him back his human mind. The camp they were building was close to the Ursine village. They were heading there not only because they needed new allies, but also because of their own survival. They had no food and they were freezing. Normally they would just conquer the village, but they didn't have the soldiers either. And it didn't help that they had to cross a river to get to that village, and they likely wouldn't be able to get across without their help. Udyr tried to convince Sejuani that fighting is the right way, that her mother Kalkia would not accept defeat. But Sejuani still hated her mother for leaving her, so it was no use. The only option was talking, and Udyr wasn't happy about it, because the Ursine had a reputation for using the darkest kinds of magic. These people weren't even called shamans anymore. Instead, they were called the Lost Ones. Their leader was the Hounded Lord, a person whom Udir knew very well. In the next scene, Udir is found in his hut, trying to meditate. In Ionia it was quite easy, but it has been 3 weeks since he successfully meditated in Freljord. In his mind he pictured a tree with blood-red leaves. But his imagination was interrupted by his surroundings. First it was the animals. The thoughts of nearby Elnuk, Druvasks and horses flooded his consciousness with feelings that weren't his own. It was a thunderous rumble only the most powerful spirit walkers could hear. Next were the emotions of men. He could feel anger, fear, bitterness and cold, like 1,000 voices that tried to outscream each other. Udir desperately searched his bag for the metal shard. When he finally found it, he stabbed it into his palm again and again. He would give anything to quiet the voices. The scene then cuts to the night of the same day. Sejuani put everyone at a great risk. They constructed a massive bonfire and prepared a ritual to contact the Ursine. The problem was that they had to burn a lot of their resources to do it. But again, they had no other option. The ritual itself was a hint of who the Ursine really were. Sejuani had to gather oath singers that would sing an unnatural hum that harmonized with the fire's roar. But while they were singing, they got covered in bear blood and guts. And on top of that, they had to cut open their own chests with bear totems. This was called the Red Blessing. It was a ritual that struck fear even into Sejuani's own heart. Even she felt that this wasn't just a normal summoning call, so she ordered her guards to bring her Udir, because in the distance a great lightning storm approached. By the time Udir arrived to stand beside Sejuani, her army was fully armed again and they stood ready to face the Ursine. Their encounter approached in waves. At first there was a static charge. Tiny sparks of lightning jumped between the weapons and shields of the Winter's Claw warriors. Then, first of the Ursine approached them from the shadows of a nearby forest. They were savages. Some were naked, others were covered in bear hide or rotting remains of clothes. Next came the beasts. Most of them were bears of various sizes and colors. These were spirit walkers trapped in the form of the unrelenting bear. Men who had forgotten they were men. But then came the monsters. They were amalgamations of bears and other creatures. Things of legends, dreams and folklore. Now these were men before too, but now they were so consumed by the true spirit, they had passed beyond normal animals. The biggest of them was a huge bear with a decayed elk skull with a mane of black feathers. When it opened its jaw, it revealed a child's face inside its maw. Then the child opened its mouth and it spewed foul brown liquid. Other nightmares like this one followed from the woods, limping, crawling and shambling forward. The Ursine formed a battle line that copied Sejuani's army. They made no gesture to attack or spoke any words. They simply waited. Udir recognized some of the lost souls on the other side. Pupils, masters, former oath singers and even friends. It didn't take long and the Hounded Lord himself approached the army with the words, "I am Ursine. I come to bring the word of the Volibear." Yes, if you weren't creeped out already, they refer to whatever they worship as the Volibear. Udir recognized the man speaking. It was his first pupil called Najak. But Udir couldn't sense his human soul. The man before them was just a walking husk serving as the voice of the Ursine. Sejuani asked him to join her host in battle, but the Hounded Lord replied he was merely the voice of the Volibear. He said that he cannot speak for him, that he is merely his instrument, that their lord walks with them. A moment later, Udir could feel what others could not. All the voices in his head grew softer, and their emotions became suppressed. Even the feelings of Sejuani, for the Volibear had come. In the forest behind Najak, the great black leaf trees crackled and shook. Taller than a mammoth, it stepped out of the woods. Each limb larger than a man propelled the beast forward. Its broken ancient armor of dark metal plate was caked brown by the dried gore of hundreds of battles. Broken weapons rusted with age jutted from its back and shoulders. One half of its face had been stripped of flesh, revealing oily bone, teeth and horns. From its mouth, an unnatural black blood rippled. Its 4 eyes, impossibly ancient, alien and pitiless, looked over Sejuani and Udir. As the bear spirit's avatar came closer, it was like the quiet at the center of a storm. Udir's mind was suddenly quiet. No animals, no feelings. Even Udir's own thoughts barely whispered. He felt only the Volibear. Its silence felt nothing like a man or animal. The Volibear's consciousness crushed everything with its purity. While Sejuani embraced the mystical creature before her, and she steeled her heart as the avatar of the bear spirit slowly approached, Udir fought against the silence in his head by trying to remember childhood stories. When the Volibear finally stopped in front of them, lightning crackled across its back. The Volibear now flooded Udyr's mind and overwhelmed him. He could feel the words bursting from inside him.
What battle is worthy of us, War Child?
The voice echoed from every spirit walker on the field. Although it boomed from the Hounded Lord the most, Sejuani froze in surprise as she heard Udyr whisper the same question. In response, Sejuani proclaimed that she would burn southern farms, hunt their children for sport, and level their walls and houses. All that the snow touched would be theirs. Her name would become Fear, and their tribe would rule forever. For a moment, there was silence before the voice boomed again.
Ask for our strength.
At this point, Udyr was fighting its mind with every inch of his body. He managed to pull out his metal shard. All he needed was to force his human words to leave his mouth. He had to stop this madness. I ask for your strength, Sejuani replied before Udyr forced himself forward. A second later, Udyr started shaking and twitching. He managed to stumble between Sejuani and the great bear spirit. With all his will, he stabbed his hand, but he felt nothing. He opened his mouth to speak, but found no words would come. Instead, the Volibear's consciousness shook him, forcing him to his knees.
Whom do you offer a sacrifice?
In his last desperate attempt, Udyr pictured Ionian hills in his mind, and he let his mind slip entirely out of his body. Now surrounded by the lively red leaves of Ionian nature, Udyr spoke freely. Speaking aloud, he denied any offerings to the spirit, proclaiming that they offer only the war and its dead. With that, the Volibear roared in anger as the spell broke. Whatever magic there was that charmed everyone surrounding it was now gone, and Sejuani witnessed the real horror before her. Lightning raged from within the creature as if it was about to explode. But although whatever stood before her was the definition of insanity, Sejuani's fear wasn't inspired by it. Her fear came from the realization that she almost pledged her people to the Earth Sign. That was the true power of the Volibear, and she admired Udyr for being able to stand against it. The Volibear then moved to attack, but before it could strike, Sejuani rode straight at it, blocking its path to Udyr. Udyr shouted his last question. He wanted to know if it would fight alongside them, or if it fears their war. The beast then roared again.
We fear nothing.
The scene then cuts to the Winter's Claw sieging the river town, the home of the Lost Ones. It seemed like those Ursine warriors who kept some of their senses together joined Sejuani in her war. And with their combined forces, they got all the way to the heart of the city. There sat the great beast spirit, surrounded by dozens of impaled corpses, with black tentacles spreading across the ground like worms. The Volibear's flesh was healed now, and with its dozen of new eyes, it looked at Udyr. It was talking directly to him now.
I will be reborn. You cannot stop that, son of man.
Udyr removed his cloak and cycled through his forms. There was an eagle, lynx, the iron boar, even a bear matching the Volibear's form. But he stopped at its greatest enemy, the great ram of the forge. Udyr would give everything to win this battle. He was sworn to protect Sejuani, as any other father would. This was a massive twist. Not only do we now know that Udyr is Sejuani's father, which means that Sejuani isn't a political child. Her mother had to get married while already pregnant. But also, we learned that the Volibear is something totally new. I think the Volibear in this story wasn't the actual demigod. This was probably just his avatar. We might have to dig deeper into this later, but I believe that Volibear was corrupted by the Void. Not only does this new horror theme heavily fit that, remember that during the Icathian War, the Ascended corrupted by the Void were literally falling apart. You know, its flesh dripping from its bones, with morphed faces and extra limbs. Exactly like the Volibear in this story. But the Void is also completely silent. The Void is all about silencing all noises. That is its purpose. So this might be a confirmation that Volibear got corrupted. It even fits the timeline. When Ornn fought Volibear in his story, that was many years before the bridge was built and the Watchers influenced Runeterra. So back then, he was still the solid demigod bear. But after Lysandra kinda doomed the entire planet, I think Volibear might have become a victim. One thing is certain, and that is that the Void is directly linked to the Darkin. So I know exactly where the comment section will be heading. Hey, did you know that we have social media and Twitch where we talk about other League facts and stories? And did you know that we have neat mugs and shirts too? The links to all of that will be below. And as always, thank you, come again.